She woke up on a stranger's shoulder somewhere over Kansas. Her neck was stiff, her mascara probably smeared, and her head had been resting against a man she had never met. Evelyn Carter, a woman who controlled boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, had fallen asleep on a random passenger like a college kid on a red-eye flight. She expected to feel embarrassed, maybe even ashamed. But when she opened her eyes and saw what he had done while she slept, something inside her chest tightened in a way she did not expect. It wasn't shame. It was something far worse. Evelyn Carter had not slept in 3 days. Not properly, anyway. There had been the merger negotiations that dragged past midnight, the investor calls that started before dawn, and the endless chain of emails that never stopped, no matter what time zone she was in. By the time she boarded the flight from Chicago to Los Angeles, her body was running on nothing but black coffee and the stubborn refusal to admit she was human. She had closed a $200 million deal that morning, shaken hands with men who respected her, and walked through the airport like she owned it. But the moment she sank into her seat in business class, something inside her finally gave way. She was 38 years old and had spent the last 15 years building an empire. Her company handled logistics for half the major retailers on the West Coast, and her name appeared on Forbes lists and conference panels and the kinds of articles that used words like visionary and trailblazer. She had a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows, a penthouse apartment she barely saw, and a calendar so packed that her assistant had to schedule her meals. What she did not have was anyone waiting for her when she landed. No husband, no children, no one who would notice if her flight was delayed or if she disappeared entirely. That was the trade she had made years ago, and most days she told herself it was worth it. The flight was only 4 hours, but it felt longer. She had planned to work through it, answering emails and reviewing contracts on her laptop. But the moment she sat down and the cabin lights dimmed, her eyelids grew heavy. She fought it at first, forcing herself to stare at the screen, but the words blurred together and her neck kept dropping forward. She told herself she would just close her eyes for a minute. Just 1 minute to rest before the real work began. When she opened them again, the plane was somewhere over Kansas, and her head was resting on a stranger's shoulder. The man beside her was not what she expected. He was maybe 40, with tired eyes, and a face that looked like it had seen more hard days than easy ones. He wore a simple flannel shirt, slightly wrinkled, and his hands were rough in a way that suggested manual labor. He was not the kind of person she usually sat next to in business class. In fact, she realized now that he did not quite fit the polished, expensive look of everyone else around them. But what struck her most was how still he was sitting. He had not moved. He had not shifted, or complained, or woken her up. He had just let her sleep. And then she saw her phone. It was plugged into the charging port on his side of the armrest, the screen glowing softly with a full battery. Her phone, which she distinctly remembered shoving into her bag, at 12% before takeoff. Someone had taken it out and plugged it in while she slept. Evelyn sat up slowly, her mind still foggy, and stared at the phone like it was some kind of trick. She looked at the man beside her, and he met her eyes with a small, almost apologetic smile. He had the kind of face that was hard to read, not unfriendly, but not eager to impress either. Just calm, patient, like a man who had learned to wait for things. "Sorry," he said quietly, nodding toward the phone. "I noticed it was almost dead when it slipped out of your bag. Figured you might need it when you landed." Evelyn did not know what to say. In her world, nobody did anything without expecting something in return. Favors were transactions. Kindness was leverage. But this man, this stranger in a flannel shirt who clearly did not belong in business class, had done something for her, without asking, without waking her, without making her feel like she owed him anything. She opened her mouth to thank him, but before she could speak, a small voice interrupted from his other side. "Daddy, is the lady awake now?" Evelyn leaned forward slightly and saw her for the first time. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with messy brown hair pulled into uneven pigtails and a stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. She was peering around her father's arm with wide, curious eyes, like Evelyn was some exotic creature she had never seen before. The man smiled down at his daughter with a warmth that Evelyn had not seen directed at anyone in a very long time. It was not the polished, performative affection she saw in her colleagues when they talked about their families. It was real, unguarded, the kind of love that didn't need an audience. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said softly. "She's awake. Why don't you say hi?" The little girl waved shyly, her small fingers barely visible over the armrest. "Hi, I'm Lily. That's my daddy. His name is Daniel. We're going to see my grandma because she's getting old, and Daddy says we should visit her before she forgets who we are." Daniel winced slightly at the bluntness, but there was no embarrassment in it, just the resigned acceptance of a parent who had learned that children say exactly what they think. He looked at Evelyn with an expression that was half apology, half amusement. "She's not wrong. My mom has early-stage dementia. We try to visit whenever we can." Evelyn nodded slowly, still trying to process everything. The charged phone. The little girl. The father who looked like he carried the weight of the world, but still smiled at his daughter, like she was the only thing that mattered. She felt something shift inside her chest, something uncomfortable and unfamiliar, like a door being pushed open that had been locked for years. "I'm Evelyn," she heard herself say. "Thank you for the phone. You didn't have to do that." Daniel shrugged, a gesture so simple and unassuming that it almost made her feel foolish for making a big deal out of it. "It's just a phone. You looked like you needed the sleep more than you needed to answer emails." She did not know how to respond to that. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. In her world, sleep was weakness. Rest was for people who did not have empires to run. But this man, this stranger, had looked at her and seen something she had trained herself to hide. He had seen that she was tired. And instead of judging her or taking advantage, he had simply let her rest. Lily tugged on her father's sleeve and whispered something Evelyn could not hear. Daniel leaned down to listen, then smiled and looked back at Evelyn. "She wants to know if you're a princess. She says you have princess hair." For the first time in longer than she could remember, Evelyn felt the corners of her mouth twitch into something that might have been a real smile. Not the practiced professional smile she used in meetings. Something softer. Something she had almost forgotten how to make. "Tell her I'm not a princess," Evelyn said. "I'm just someone who works too much." Daniel relayed the message, and Lily frowned thoughtfully before responding with the unshakable logic of a 7-year-old. "My daddy works too much too, but he still reads me stories at night." "Do you have anyone to read you stories?" The question hit Evelyn harder than she expected. It was innocent, just a child's curiosity, but it cut straight through all the armor she had spent years building. "Do you have anyone to read you stories? Do you have anyone at all?" She thought about her empty apartment, the silence that greeted her every night, the way she sometimes left the television on just to hear another human voice. She thought about the last time someone had done something kind for her without expecting anything in return, and she realized she could not remember. "No," she said quietly, surprising herself with the honesty. "I don't." Lily considered this for a moment, then nodded solemnly. "That's okay. Daddy can share. He does really good voices." Daniel laughed softly, a sound that seemed to fill the space between them with something warm. He looked at Evelyn with eyes that held no judgment, no pity, just a quiet understanding that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. "Kids," he said, simply as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. Evelyn turned to look out the window at the clouds below her reflection, staring back at her in the dark glass. She was still the same woman who had closed a $200 million deal that morning. Still the same CEO with the corner office and the packed calendar. But something was different now. Something small but undeniable. A crack in the wall she had built around herself. A question she could not ignore. What had she given up to become the woman she was? And was it worth it? She did not have an answer yet, but for the first time in a very long time, she was willing to ask. The flight attendant came by with a cart of drinks, and Evelyn ordered a black coffee out of habit. Daniel asked for apple juice for Lily, and nothing for himself. It was a small detail, the kind of thing most people would not notice, but Evelyn noticed. She noticed the way he made sure his daughter had everything she needed before thinking about himself. She noticed the worn edges of his wallet when he reached for it, only to realize the drinks were complimentary. She noticed the way he relaxed slightly when he did not have to pay. These were not things Evelyn usually paid attention to. In her world, money was invisible. It flowed in and out of accounts, appeared on statements, funded deals and acquisitions, without ever feeling real. She had not thought about the price of a drink in years. But watching Daniel, she was suddenly aware of the gap between them, a gap so wide it felt almost obscene. She was sitting in business class because her company had a corporate account. He was sitting in business class because someone had probably given up their seat, or the flight was overbooked in economy. The distance between their lives could be measured in zeros, and yet here, they were sharing an armrest like it meant nothing. Lily had fallen asleep against her father's side, the stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. In sleep, she looked even smaller, more fragile. Daniel adjusted her blanket with the careful precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. His movements were gentle, but practiced the muscle memory of a parent who had learned to do everything with one hand while holding a child with the other. Evelyn watched him without meaning to. There was something almost hypnotic about it, the quiet competence, the unspoken tenderness. She had seen executives manage billion-dollar portfolios with less care than this man showed tucking in a blanket. "She's beautiful," Evelyn said, the words coming out before she could stop them. It was not the kind of thing she usually said. Compliments about children were for people who wanted children, and Evelyn had decided long ago that she did not. But looking at Lily, at the peaceful innocence of her sleeping face, she felt something stir in a part of herself she had thought was closed off forever. Daniel smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. "She's everything. The only good thing I ever did." There was weight in those words, a history that Evelyn could sense, but not see. She wanted to ask, but she also did not want to pry. In her experience, people shared what they wanted to share, and pushing only made them retreat. So she waited, sipping her coffee, letting the silence stretch between them like an invitation. Daniel looked out the window at the clouds below his reflection, ghost-like against the glass. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost as if he was talking to himself. Her mother died 3 years ago. Cancer. It happened fast, faster than anyone expected. One day, we were planning her 5th birthday party. The next, we were planning a funeral. Evelyn felt the words land in her chest like stones. She had lost people before, colleagues and distant relatives, but never someone close, never someone whose absence would leave a hole that could not be filled. She tried to imagine what it would be like to lose a spouse, to suddenly be alone with a child who was too young to understand why mommy was not coming back. She could not. "I'm sorry," she said, and for once the words did not feel hollow. "I can't imagine how hard that must have been." Daniel shrugged, but there was no dismissiveness in it, just acceptance. The kind of acceptance that came from having no other choice. You don't imagine it, you just live it, one day at a time, one diaper at a time, one school drop-off at a time. You keep moving because stopping isn't an option. He turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes that made Evelyn feel exposed, like he could see past all the armor she wore. "What about you? What's waiting for you in Los Angeles?" The question caught her off guard. People did not usually ask her personal questions. They asked about her company, her strategies, her opinions on market trends. They asked questions with answers that could be quoted in articles or used in board meetings. But this man, this stranger, who had lost his wife and was raising a daughter alone, was asking what was waiting for her, not what she was working on, not what she was closing. What was waiting? "Work," she said automatically. "Meetings, the usual." Daniel nodded slowly, but his expression suggested he had heard what she did not say. "That's not really an answer, is it?" Evelyn opened her mouth to deflect, to give him the polished response she had given 1,000 times before. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the way Lily had asked if anyone read her stories. Maybe it was the simple fact that this man had charged her phone and let her sleep without expecting anything in return. Whatever it was, it made her tell the truth. "Nothing," she said quietly. "Nothing is waiting for me. I have an apartment I barely see, and a calendar full of people who need things from me. But no one is waiting for me. Not really." The admission hung in the air between them, heavier than she expected. She had never said those words out loud before. She had barely allowed herself to think them. But now that they were out, she could not take them back. And strangely, she did not want to. Daniel did not look surprised. He did not offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He just nodded like he understood something she was only beginning to see. "I used to think success was about building something that lasted. A career. A legacy. Something people would remember after you were gone. But after Sarah died, I realized I had it backwards. The things that last aren't the things you build. They're the things you give." Sarah. His wife's name was Sarah. Evelyn filed it away without meaning to the way she filed away details in business meetings. But this was not a business meeting. This was something else entirely. "What do you mean?" she asked, genuinely curious. Daniel glanced down at Lily, still sleeping peacefully against his side. "When Sarah was sick, she wasn't worried about our savings account or our retirement plan. She was worried about Lily, about whether I would be okay, about whether Lily would remember her. She spent her last weeks writing letters for Lily to open on every birthday until she turns 18. She recorded videos of herself reading bedtime stories so Lily could hear her voice. She gave everything she had left to the people she loved." His voice cracked slightly, and he cleared his throat before continuing. "I work 2 jobs now. Maintenance at a school during the day, security at a warehouse at night. It's not glamorous. It's not what I thought my life would look like. But I do it so Lily can stay in a good school, the same school Sarah picked out for her before she got sick. And every night, no matter how tired I am, I read Lily a story. Because that's what lasts. Not the money, not the job, the time you give to the people who matter." Evelyn felt something crack open inside her, the same crack she had felt earlier, but deeper, now wider. She thought about her own life, the years she had spent climbing and achieving and accumulating. She had money. She had power. She had everything society said she should want. But what had she given? What had she built that would last beyond the next quarterly report? The answer was nothing. She had built an empire of numbers and transactions deals that would be forgotten the moment something better came along. She had no letters to leave behind. No recorded stories. No one who would miss her voice when she was gone. "How do you do it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do you keep going when you've lost so much?" Daniel thought about it for a moment, his hand resting gently on Lily's head. "I don't know if I have a good answer. Some days are harder than others. Some days I want to give up. But then I look at her, and I remember that she didn't choose any of this. She didn't choose to lose her mother. She didn't choose to have a father who works all the time. But she wakes up every morning with a smile anyway. She trusts me to take care of her, and I can't let her down. He met Evelyn's eyes with a directness that made her uncomfortable. I think that's the secret if there is one. You can't do it for yourself. You have to do it for someone else. Something bigger than your own pain. Evelyn did not have a response to that. She had spent her entire life doing things for herself, for her career, for her reputation, for the version of success she had been taught to chase. She had never considered doing it for someone else. She had never had anyone to do it for. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, and Lily stirred against Daniel's side. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at her father with the drowsy confusion of a child waking from a nap. Daniel smiled down at her and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Hey, sleepyhead," he said softly. "We're almost there." Lily yawned and rubbed her eyes with small fists. Then she looked over at Evelyn as if remembering she was there. "Did you and Daddy have a good talk?" Evelyn smiled, and this time it came easier than before. "Yes. Your daddy is very smart." Lily nodded seriously, as if this was obvious information. "He knows everything, except how to make pancakes. Mommy made better pancakes." Daniel laughed, a sound that was both sad and warm at the same time. "She's not wrong. Sarah made the best pancakes. I still can't get the recipe right." The captain's voice came over the intercom announcing their descent into Los Angeles. The flight attendants began moving through the cabin, collecting trash and checking seatbelts. The ordinary rituals of landing, the same rituals Evelyn had experienced hundreds of times before. But this time felt different. This time, she did not want the flight to end. She watched Daniel help Lily buckle her seatbelt, watched him check her ears for the pressure change, watched him whisper something that made her giggle. Every movement was filled with such care, such attention. It was like watching someone perform a sacred ritual, something holy and ordinary at the same time. As the plane descended through the clouds, Evelyn felt the weight of everything she had heard pressing down on her. Daniel had lost his wife. He worked 2 jobs. He could barely afford to keep his daughter in school. By any measure, his life was harder than hers. He had every reason to be bitter, angry, closed off from the world. But he wasn't. He had charged a stranger's phone. He had let her sleep on his shoulder without complaint. He had shared his story without asking for anything in return. He was kinder than anyone she had met in years, and he had less than almost everyone she knew. Did not make sense. It violated everything Evelyn believed about how the world worked. In her experience, people who had less were desperate, grasping, always looking for an angle. But Daniel was none of those things. He was just a man trying to do his best for his daughter. A man who had figured out something that Evelyn, with all her success and money and power, had never understood. The plane touched down with a gentle bump, and the cabin erupted in the usual rustle of passengers gathering their things. Evelyn reached for her bag, her movements automatic, her mind still churning. She should say something. Thank him again. Wish him well. But the words felt inadequate, too small for what she was feeling. Daniel stood up and retrieved a small backpack from the overhead bin, then helped Lily out of her seat. The little girl clutched her stuffed rabbit and looked up at Evelyn with wide eyes. "Bye, Princess Lady," she said, waving her small hand. Evelyn felt something tighten in her throat. "Goodbye, Lily. Take care of your daddy." Lily nodded solemnly. "I will. He needs a lot of taking care of." Daniel smiled at Evelyn, a smile that held no expectations, no agenda, just genuine warmth. "It was nice meeting you, Evelyn. I hope you find what you're looking for." And then they were gone, swallowed by the stream of passengers moving toward the exit. Evelyn sat frozen in her seat, watching the space where they had been. The flight attendant asked if she needed anything, and she shook her head without really hearing the question. She gathered her things slowly, her laptop bag heavy on her shoulder. The phone Daniel had charged was still at full battery. Such a small thing. Such a meaningless gesture in the grand scheme of her life. But it felt like the most significant thing anyone had done for her in years. The airport was the same as every other airport. Bright lights and hurried people, and the constant hum of announcements. Evelyn walked through it like a ghost, her body moving on autopilot while her mind stayed on that plane. She saw Daniel and Lily once more briefly in the distance near baggage claim. Daniel was carrying Lily on his hip, now her head resting on his shoulder, her rabbit dangling from one hand. He did not see Evelyn watching. He was focused entirely on his daughter. A car was waiting for her outside the same black sedan that always waited. The driver opened the door without a word, and Evelyn slid into the leather seat. The air conditioning was perfect. The water bottle in the cup holder was chilled to exactly the right temperature. Everything was as it should be, but as the car pulled away from the curb, Evelyn looked out the window at the airport disappearing behind her, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Empty. Completely, utterly empty. Her office was waiting, her corner office with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the view of the city she had conquered. Her assistant had already sent 3 emails with urgent items. Her calendar was full for the next 2 weeks. There was so much to do, so many things that needed her attention. Important things, things that mattered. But sitting in the back of that car, watching the Los Angeles skyline grow larger through the windshield, Evelyn could not make herself care about any of it. All she could think about was a man in a flannel shirt who had lost everything and still found reasons to be kind. A little girl who asked if anyone read her stories. A wife named Sarah who had spent her final days writing letters for the daughter she would never see grow up. And then there was Evelyn, 38 years old, successful by every metric that existed, worth more money than she could spend in 3 lifetimes. And she had nothing. Nothing that lasted. Nothing that mattered. Nothing that anyone would remember when she was gone. The car pulled up to her building and the doorman rushed to open her door. She walked through the lobby she had walked through 1,000 times, took the elevator to the top floor, and stepped into the apartment that was supposed to be her reward for all those years of sacrifice. It was beautiful. It was expensive. It was exactly what she had worked so hard to achieve, and it had never felt more like a prison. Evelyn did not sleep that night. She sat on her couch in the dark, staring at the city lights through her floor-to-ceiling windows, and tried to remember the last time she had felt something real. Not the adrenaline of closing a deal, not the satisfaction of watching numbers climb on a spreadsheet. Something real, something human. The kind of feeling that Daniel had when he looked at his daughter. She could not remember. The next morning she went to the office because that was what she did. She attended meetings. She reviewed reports. She made decisions that affected thousands of people she would never meet. Her assistant brought her coffee at the exact time she always brought it, and everyone treated her with the same mixture of respect and fear they always showed. Nothing had changed. Everything was exactly the same. But Evelyn was not the same. She kept thinking about what Daniel had said. The things that last are not the things you build. They are the things you give. She had spent her entire career building things, companies, portfolios, a reputation that opened doors and commanded attention. But what had she given? What had she offered to anyone that was not part of a transaction? The answer kept coming back the same way. Nothing. 3 days after the flight, Evelyn found herself doing something she had never done before. She searched for Daniel online. It was not hard. She remembered the details. He had shared his daughter's name, the school his wife had chosen, the city they lived in. Within an hour, she had found enough to piece together the full picture. Daniel worked as a maintenance worker at Jefferson Elementary during the day, and as a security guard at a distribution warehouse at night. His wife Sarah had died of ovarian cancer 3 years ago, just as he had said. Lily was enrolled at a private school called Riverside Academy, a place known for its excellent programs and its tuition of nearly $15,000 a year. There were records of payment plans, deferred tuition, financial aid applications. Daniel was doing everything he could to keep his daughter in that school, and he was barely holding on. Evelyn stared at the screen for a long time. She thought about the worn wallet Daniel had reached for on the plane. She thought about the way he had ordered nothing for himself while making sure Lily had her apple juice. She thought about the 2 jobs, the exhaustion that must come from working both of them, the sacrifice required just to give his daughter the education his dead wife had wanted for her. And then she thought about herself, her bank account with more money than she could spend, her investments that generated passive income while she slept, the bonuses she received for deals she barely remembered closing. She had so much, more than enough, more than she would ever need. What was she doing with it? The question haunted her for another week. She went through the motions of her life, attending meetings and making decisions, but her mind was somewhere else. She kept seeing Lily's face, hearing her voice, asking if anyone read Evelyn's stories. She kept hearing Daniel's words about his wife spending her final days writing letters for a daughter who would grow up without her. She kept feeling that crack in her chest, the one that had opened on the plane, getting wider every day. Finally, on a Sunday morning when the office was empty and the city was quiet, Evelyn sat down at her desk and did something she had not done in years. She wrote a letter by hand. It took her 4 attempts to get it right. The first 3 were too formal, too much like business correspondence. She kept falling back on the language she used in memos and proposals, the safe, distant words that kept people at arm's length. But this letter needed to be different. This letter needed to be real. The final version was simple. She wrote about the flight, about waking up on his shoulder and finding her phone charged, about Lily asking if anyone read her stories, and the way that question had cut through everything Evelyn thought she knew about her life. She wrote about what Daniel had said about giving instead of building, about the things that last. She told him that she had been thinking about those words ever since, and that they had changed something in her she did not fully understand yet. And then she wrote about why she was sending this letter with a check for $25,000. She explained that it was not charity, it was not pity. It was not a rich woman trying to feel better about herself by throwing money at someone less fortunate. It was something else entirely. It was her first attempt at giving something that mattered. She wanted Lily to stay in the school her mother had chosen. She wanted Daniel to have one less thing to worry about, one less weight on his shoulders. She wanted to do something that would last longer than a quarterly report. She asked him not to thank her. She asked him not to feel obligated or indebted. She told him that if anyone should be grateful, it was her, because he had reminded her of something she had forgotten a long time ago. That success without compassion was just another word for emptiness. She signed the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and mailed it before she could change her mind. 2 weeks later, a response arrived at her office. It was written on lined paper torn from a notebook, the kind children use in school. The handwriting was careful, but unpolished, the letters of someone who wrote more with his hands than with a pen. Daniel thanked her despite her request. He said he had read her letter 3 times before he believed it was real. He said Lily had been asking about the princess lady from the airplane, and he did not know how to explain that sometimes strangers became important without meaning to. He said the money would cover Lily's tuition for the next 2 years, and that he had cried when he realized what that meant. Not because of the money itself, but because someone he barely knew had seen him, really seen him, and that was worth more than any amount. At the bottom of the letter in crayon, Lily had drawn a picture. It showed an airplane with 3 figures inside a small girl with brown hair, a man in a blue shirt, and a woman with what Lily had labeled princess hair. They were all smiling. Above the airplane in wobbly letters, Lily had written, "Thank you for being nice to my daddy." Evelyn kept that picture. She framed it and put it on her desk, right next to the awards and accolades that used to be the only things she displayed. When people asked about it, she told them the story, the flight, the charged phone, the little girl who asked if anyone read her stories. And slowly, one conversation at a time, the story began to spread. 6 months later, Evelyn was invited to speak at a leadership conference in New York. The organizers wanted her to talk about business strategy, about the secrets of her success. But when she stood at that podium and looked out at the audience of executives and entrepreneurs, she realized she had something more important to say. She told them about Daniel, about Sarah, about Lily and the letters and the bedtime stories recorded, so a daughter would remember her mother's voice. She told them about waking up on a stranger's shoulder and discovering that the smallest act of kindness could crack open a heart that had been closed for years. She told them that she had spent her career measuring success in numbers, in deals closed and profits earned, and that she had been wrong. Success, she said, was not about what you accumulated. It was about what you gave. It was about the moments when you chose kindness over convenience, compassion over calculation. It was about seeing the people around you, really seeing them, and deciding that their struggles mattered as much as your own. She told them about the $25,000, but she made clear that the money was not the point. The point was the decision to act. The point was recognizing that she had the power to make someone's life a little easier and choosing to use it. Anyone could do that. Not everyone had money to give, but everyone had something. Time, attention, a shoulder to lean on, a phone charger offered without being asked. The audience was silent when she finished. And then slowly the applause began. Evelyn Carter returned to Los Angeles that night to her corner office and her penthouse apartment and her calendar full of meetings. But something was different now. The crack in her chest had become a doorway, and she had finally walked through it. She still closed deals. She still made money. She still ran her company with the same precision and determination that had built it. But she also started a foundation in Sarah's name to help single parents afford quality education for their children. She mentored young women who reminded her of herself, who were so focused on climbing that they had forgotten why they started. She learned to see the people around her not as obstacles or opportunities, but as human beings with their own stories and struggles. And every night before she went to sleep, she thought about a man in a flannel shirt who had lost everything and still found reasons to be kind. A little girl who believed in princesses, a flight that should have been forgettable, but became the most important journey of her life. Kindness, she had learned, was like that. It did not need to be grand or expensive or complicated. It just needed to be real. And once it took flight, there was no telling how far it could go.